Ferrari has prepared well for the second day of Formula One, testing at the 5.412-kilometer Bahrain International Circuit in Sakhir. Today's work schedule should not differ much from yesterday's. Lewis Hamilton is again behind the wheel of the SF-25 in the morning session, keeping in mind, unfortunately, that weather conditions are not ideal. The track surface is below 15 degrees, wind is at 5.7 kilometers per hour, and there is a chance of rain that could threaten the session. It will be interesting to understand what kind of setup Lewis Hamilton will use, whether he will continue with aggressive tests or, like his teammate, take the track with a targeted setup. After a couple of more intense laps, Lewis Hamilton immediately started a race pace simulation. The number 44 car was again fitted with the yellow-banded Pirelli C3 tires. From the first images, it appeared that the instability that characterized the runs yesterday morning was not present, and indeed, shortly after, following the work to remove the aerodynamic shovels on the front wing, confirmation arrived. The British driver's car is nothing like yesterday's. At the end of the run, where he completed several laps in race configuration, the Briton tried 2 push laps. Although the car still bounces a bit too much, the car is still very low. The Ferrari SF-25's behavior is very good. The driving is very linear, smooth, and without any hesitation. Lewis Hamilton easily finds the apex point at turn 13, a situation that was not possible yesterday. The handling in the first 3 corners is excellent, with a more aggressive pedal stance, similar to Charles Leclerc's in the afternoon. The traction phases are still good, especially at turn 10, where the English driver is able to put all the power from the 066/15 power unit to the ground without errors. The interesting aspect concerns turn 13, where, compared to the problematic behavior of yesterday, no axis is dominant, showing a neutral balance. Afterwards, the English driver conducts constant speed tests, 200 kilometers per hour for comparison with the wind tunnel. In his fastest lap with the DRS system open, the maximum speed reached 315 kilometers per hour. This data seems consistent with yesterday's figures and those from the 2024 Formula One testing campaign. In addition, there is an interesting observation to consider. Watching several onboard shots, it's noticeable that the Modena car is quite stiff at the front end. This is not necessarily a negative aspect considering the precision of this axle, which allowed Lewis Hamilton to paint the cornering trajectories very well. Understeer problems seem to have been minimized, fortunately. This was information that needed to be confirmed after the rain break. Yes, because at the Bahrain circuit, unfortunately, the weather conditions are not ideal. Fortunately, the rain wasn't heavy, and after about an hour of pause, action resumed on track. Ferrari again put the British driver in the car with C3 tires, a compound that has already seen 28 laps completed yesterday. After a few laps, Lewis made a quick stop in the pit lane where the tires were changed, still C3. The car continues to show the same clean and orderly attitude. With the same power unit settings, the 7-time Formula One world champion completed a couple of push laps where the handling was quite mild. Essentially, the attitude observed before the rain break was fully confirmed. However, it is interesting to note that, compared to the previous run, there was greater ease in the acceleration phases, with the 7-time world champion pressing the throttle earlier, showing more aggression. During the pit stop, the mechanics worked again on the setup. This time it was a tweak to the front wing, adding a small adjustment to the suspension stiffness. Once again, this adjustment showed results on track, confirming that the SF-25 single-seater, for now, seems to be a car that responds well to the mechanics' adjustments based on driver feedback. The British driver's work continues, and in parallel, the drivability of the Italian car improves. It remains to be understood what type of adjustment was made to the front end. Lewis's last lap was almost perfect, despite the Ferrari not being able to hit the apex and attack the curb like the McLaren. It's positive to note that the car is very composed and does not show any rear-end instability. This was not at all expected after the issues faced yesterday morning. Lewis Hamilton's time is coming to an end. In the afternoon, his Maranello teammate Charles Leclerc will take over the wheel. According to various reports from the Italian media, the Monegasque will focus more on high-fuel tests, as the environmental conditions are getting closer to those of a real Grand Prix. Lastly, one key fact. Lewis Hamilton's satisfaction was noted after yesterday's troubles. Lewis Hamilton ended his second day in the 2025 Ferrari with the fastest time in Bahrain testing as rain disrupted the morning session on day 2 of Formula One pre-season running. The 7-time Formula One champion's fastest lap came inside the final 45 minutes of the 4-hour session, and at the time put him half a second clear at the head of the order. The British driver was top anyway prior to that and had already threatened an improvement on his final C3 tire run, the mid-range tire in Pirelli's offering that will be the soft option at the Bahrain Grand Prix in April, but backed out of that run when he drifted out onto the curb exiting the turn 11 left-hander. His eventual best of 1.29.379 was more than 2 seconds faster than the fastest time in the corresponding session last year, although that was heavily truncated as a loose drain was repaired, and half a second up on the benchmark day 2 time from 2024, namely Carlos Sainz's 1.29.921. George Russell, who briefly went faster than Hamilton as running resumed following an unusual mid-session rain shower, did improve thereafter, though the Mercedes driver was still 0.399 seconds off his former teammate. With 71 laps, George Russell completed the most tours of any driver in the morning session. Carlos Sainz was the only other driver to lap within a second of Lewis Hamilton's best time, the Williams driver producing a best time of 1.30.090. That was eye-catching to an extent, though, as the former Ferrari driver, who is in the Williams for the full day, was the outlier in being the only driver in the morning session to set his best lap on the harder C2 compound. His running in the final hour was dedicated largely to long running on the same C2 tire. Rain had been in the air from the start of the session and was at its heaviest around the halfway point, which brought on-track running largely to a halt, save for Esteban Ocon completing 3 out-and-in runs on intermediate tires for Haas, which is one of only 2 teams to have brought any form of wet-weather tire to Bahrain alongside Aston Martin. Pierre Gasly was 4th fastest for Alpine, with former Ferrari driver Fernando Alonso improving to 5th late in the session in the Aston Martin. His focus prior to that had been a long run on the hardest C1 compound. As it did on day 1 of the test, McLaren waited until more than an hour into the session to complete a timed lap with Oscar Piastri as it worked through its performance program. Piastri, who ended up 7th behind the Racing Bulls car of Yuki Tsunoda, was involved in the only on-track incident of note to date in F1 2025 testing when he made light contact with Nico Hülkenberg's Sauber. Having set a personal best in the first sector, the McLaren caught the Sauber on the run downhill towards the turn 8 right-hander, and a combination of Piastri running deep and Hülkenberg dawdling, albeit off the racing line, on the corner exit meant the front left corner of the McLaren made contact with the Sauber's right rear. Neither car sustained any significant damage.